It began the way these stories usually do, quietly, almost harmlessly. At 6:37 p.m. on a Tuesday evening in Dubai, security cameras captured the final moments of a confrontation that began with a laptop return and ended with a body on concrete. The footage shows two figures in a hotel parking garage, one moving quickly toward an exit, another following at a careful distance. Within seconds, motion alarms would trigger. Within minutes, paramedics would arrive to find a 26-year-old Filipino woman at the bottom of a 3-meter drop, her phone still recording. But to understand how Dizon and Kareem Al-Sayegh ended up in that parking garage, we need to go back 18 months earlier, to the gleaming floors of Dubai Marina Mall and a simple customer service interaction that would spiral into obsession, betrayal, and murder. Mara was 26, a sales associate at a high-end electronics store who remembered faces, names, and the model numbers customers mentioned in passing. Kareem was 43, a real estate developer who paid with corporate cards and never bargained. They met over a laptop return. He said his assistant bought the wrong spec. She handled it without fuss and offered to personally transfer his files, so he wouldn't lose anything. There was nothing dramatic about the beginning, just two people stepping over small lines until the lines were behind them. But in Dubai's glittering towers, some promises are designed to destroy. And what started as exceptional customer service would become the first step toward a confrontation that neither of them would survive intact. Mara Dizon was born on January 12, 1992, in Naga City, Baikal, the eldest of 3 daughters in a household where hope and hardship shared the same small space. Her father, Edgar, drove a jeepney along Route 7, his hands calloused from gripping the steering wheel through 12-hour shifts in Manila traffic. Her mother, Luz, sold vegetables at the public market, rising at 4 a.m. to arrange tomatoes and onions in neat pyramids before the morning rush. The family lived in a concrete blockhouse with thin walls and a tin roof that drummed with rain during typhoon season. There was no air conditioning, just electric fans that barely moved the humid air. The girls shared one bedroom, sleeping on foam mattresses laid directly on the floor. Privacy was a luxury they couldn't afford, but love filled the spaces that money couldn't. Mara understood sacrifice before she understood multiplication tables. While her younger sisters, Divine and Precious, played with neighbors' children in the narrow alleys between houses, Mara helped count the day's earnings from the vegetable stall. She learned to sort peso bills by denomination, to calculate change without a calculator, to spot the difference between fresh produce and goods that wouldn't last another day. She was 8 when she started walking Divine and Precious to elementary school, 10 when she began tutoring classmates whose parents paid her 20 pesos per session, 12 when she took a weekend job helping the neighborhood sari-sari store owner organize inventory and handle transactions. Every peso went into a glass jar hidden behind the rice container in their kitchen. Education money, her mother called it. Future money. Mara finished high school as valedictorian, earning a partial scholarship to study information technology at Ateneo de Naga University. The scholarship covered tuition but not books, transportation, or the laptop she needed for programming courses. She worked nights at a call center, taking customer service calls from Americans complaining about their internet service, while she studied database management during breaks. 4 years of 18-hour days between classes and call center shifts. 4 years of instant noodles for dinner and generic pain relievers for the headaches that came from staring at computer screens. 4 years of watching classmates with wealthy families buy new equipment while she fixed second-hand laptops with electrical tape and determination. She graduated summa cum laude in 2015 with a degree in information technology and a job offer from a software company in Cebu. The salary was respectable by Philippine standards, enough to support herself and send money home. But when her mother was diagnosed with diabetes and her father's jeepney broke down beyond repair, respectable wasn't enough. Dubai offered something the Philippines couldn't: salaries that could change lives overnight. Mara applied for dozens of positions through overseas employment agencies, enduring interviews conducted over crackling video calls and document verification processes that required traveling to Manila multiple times. The electronics retailer at Dubai Marina Mall offered her a sales associate position with a starting salary of AED 3,500 per month, more than triple what she earned in Cebu. She arrived in Dubai on September 15, 2017, carrying a single suitcase and enough uncertainty to fill the cargo hold. The humidity hit her first, then the scale of everything. Buildings that disappeared into clouds, highways with 8 lanes, malls larger than entire districts back home. She shared a studio apartment in Al-Barsha with 2 other Filipino women, Gina, who cleaned offices in Business Bay, and Rachel, who worked as a nanny for a British family in Arabian ranches. The apartment was clean but sparse, furnished with the essentials that previous tenants had left behind. A small refrigerator, 2 single beds, a plastic table with mismatched chairs. They took turns cooking rice on a single burner, shared toiletries to save money, and video-called their families together on Sundays, gathering around whoever had the strongest Wi-Fi signal that week. Mara sent 75% of her salary home every month. The remaining 25% covered her share of rent, food, transportation, and the small emergencies that seemed to arrive without warning. A broken phone, medicine for the persistent cough that came from the mall's aggressive air conditioning, the visa renewal fees that caught newcomers by surprise. She learned to navigate Dubai's social hierarchies quickly. Emiratis first, then Western expatriates, then other Arabs, then Indians and Pakistanis, then Southeast Asians, then Filipinos. She learned which customers expected instant attention and which ones appreciated patience. She learned to smile when wealthy women complained about electronics they could afford to replace every month, while she calculated whether she could afford to replace her worn-out work shoes. But Mara was exceptional at her job. She had the technical knowledge to explain complex specifications and the emotional intelligence to understand what customers actually needed, even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. She remembered details: the businessman who traveled to Chennai every month and needed a phone with specific frequency bands, the teenage girl whose parents restricted her internet access and needed creative solutions for school projects. Within 6 months, her sales numbers consistently ranked in the top 3. The store manager, Ahmed, began assigning her to handle the most demanding customers and the highest value transactions. She earned small bonuses that she didn't report to her roommates, not from selfishness but from habit. In her family, unexpected money went immediately toward emergencies or opportunities. Kareem Al-Sayegh operated in an entirely different Dubai. At 43, he owned Al-Sayegh Development, a mid-tier construction company that specialized in residential towers in Jumeirah Lake Towers and Business Bay. Not the glamorous projects that made architectural magazines, but solid investments that generated steady returns for silent partners who preferred anonymity to recognition. He lived in a 3-bedroom apartment in Marina Pinnacle, furnished with the understated luxury that signaled serious money without obvious display. Italian leather furniture, German appliances, artwork purchased from galleries rather than hotels. His watch was a Rolex Submariner, expensive enough to impress, common enough not to invite questions about its provenance. Kareem had been married to Parisa for 15 years, a union that began as arrangement and evolved into comfortable coexistence. Parisa was Iranian-British, educated, fluent in 4 languages, and skilled at managing the social obligations that came with his business success. She organized dinner parties for potential investors, maintained relationships with the wives of important contacts, and presented the image of a successful expatriate couple building a life in the Gulf. But the marriage had acquired the quiet emptiness that settles over relationships built on pragmatism rather than passion. They shared a bed but rarely touched. They attended events together but rarely spoke about anything more intimate than logistics. After 13 years of trying to conceive without success, they had stopped discussing children altogether. Kareem filled the emotional void with affairs that followed a predictable pattern. He preferred women who were financially vulnerable, culturally isolated, and grateful for attention from someone who could solve their problems with a credit card transaction. The affairs lasted 6 to 8 months, just long enough for genuine feelings to develop before he ended them with generous severance packages and firm reminders about discretion. 2 years earlier, there had been Melissa, a 19-year-old Filipino cashier at a supermarket in Dara. She sent money to her family in Davao and lived in a bed space that she shared with 5 other women. Kareem had approached her gradually. Small gifts, concern about her living situation, offers to help improve her circumstances. The affair lasted 7 months, ending when Melissa began talking about introducing him to her family during their video calls. The pattern was always the same. Initial kindness, gradual escalation, promises that felt real in the moment, then strategic withdrawal when the women expected more than he intended to give. He told himself these relationships were mutually beneficial. He provided financial support and companionship. They provided attention and affection. He never considered the emotional aftermath for women who had believed his promises were genuine. Parisa knew about the affairs but had made a calculated decision to ignore them. Divorce would mean losing her social position, her financial security, and her visa status. The expatriate community in Dubai was small enough that scandals followed people indefinitely. Better to maintain the facade of a successful marriage while pursuing her own interests, art classes, charity work, long lunches with friends who pretended not to notice her husband's absences. But that calculation was about to change. In early 2019, Parisa discovered she was pregnant. After 13 years of disappointing medical consultations and expensive fertility treatments, the pregnancy felt like a miracle or a complication depending on perspective. At 38, carrying her first child, Parisa's tolerance for her husband's infidelities evaporated completely. The timing was particularly cruel. Just as she was preparing to tell Kareem about the pregnancy, she noticed the familiar signs of a new affair. Different cologne, unexplained absences, the careful attention to his phone that accompanied emotional investment in someone new. When she saw him return a laptop to the electronics store at Dubai Marina Mall and linger longer than necessary at the customer service counter, she knew the pattern was beginning again. They met over something ordinary. A laptop return on a busy Thursday afternoon in November 2017. Kareem approached the customer service counter at Electronic Zone carrying a sleek silver laptop in its original packaging, moving with the purposeful efficiency of someone accustomed to solving problems quickly. "My assistant ordered the wrong specifications," he told Mara, placing the laptop on the counter with care. "I need the same model but with 32 gigabytes of RAM instead of 16 gigabytes. Mara examined the receipt and the laptop's condition with professional thoroughness. Most returns were straightforward transactions, but something about this customer's calm demeanor and specific technical knowledge suggested he wasn't the typical buyer who changed his mind after reading online reviews. "The 32 gigabytes configuration is a special order item," she explained, checking inventory on her terminal. "I can have it here by Saturday if you'd prefer to wait. Or I can recommend similar models that are in stock." "Saturday works," Kareem replied, then paused as if considering something. "Actually, would it be possible to transfer the files from this laptop to the new one? I know it's not standard service, but I'd be willing to pay extra." The request was unusual but not impossible. Most customers handled their own data transfers or hired technical services, but Mara had the skills and the time during her shift. More importantly, she recognized the opportunity to provide exceptional service that might generate future sales. "I can handle the transfer personally," she offered. "It would take about 30 minutes, and there's no additional charge for the service." Kareem smiled in a way that suggested genuine surprise. "That's remarkably efficient. Most places would send me to 3 different departments and charge me twice what the laptop costs." The exchange was professional but memorable. Kareem appreciated competence, and Mara had demonstrated both technical skill and customer focus without the rehearsed enthusiasm that many retail workers use to mask indifference. When he returned on Saturday to collect the new laptop, she had completed the transfer perfectly and included a handwritten note explaining the optimization settings she had configured. "This is above and beyond," Kareem said, reviewing the note. "Thank you for taking care of the details." 2 days later, he returned with a coffee from the cafe across the promenade. "I thought you might appreciate something better than the coffee from the food court," he said, placing the cup on her counter. "Consider it a proper thank you for exceptional service." The gift was small but thoughtful, not the grand gesture of someone trying to impress, but the considerate act of someone who paid attention to details. Mara accepted it graciously, though she was careful to maintain professional boundaries. Customers occasionally expressed appreciation with small gifts, and she had learned to accept them without encouraging further gestures. The third interaction came a week later, when Kareem returned with questions about phone encryption for business use. The conversation lasted 20 minutes, covering technical specifications and security features, but gradually shifting toward more personal topics: Dubai's expatriate community, the challenges of working in a foreign country, the small details that made life easier or more difficult. When Mara's break arrived, Kareem suggested continuing their conversation over coffee at the cafe where he had purchased her earlier gift. It was a casual invitation, but it represented a shift from customer service interaction to something more personal. Mara hesitated briefly, weighing professional considerations against the loneliness that came from working in a foreign country where genuine conversations were rare. She agreed to coffee, telling herself it was networking rather than anything more significant. But as they sat in the cafe overlooking the Marina, discussing everything from technology trends to family obligations, Mara realized that Kareem was unlike the customers who typically asked for her personal time. He listened without waiting for his turn to speak, asked thoughtful questions about her background and goals, and shared details about his own experience as an expatriate without the condescension that often characterized interactions between customers and service workers. The conversation revealed unexpected parallels. Both had come to Dubai seeking opportunities that didn't exist in their home countries. Both sent money to family members who depended on their success. Both navigated the complex social dynamics of a city where nationality, wealth, and connections determined access and respect. When they parted that afternoon, Kareem asked for her WhatsApp contact, explaining that he often needed technical advice for business purchases and appreciated having someone knowledgeable to consult. Mara provided her number, rationalizing the decision as professional networking while acknowledging that the conversation had felt more personal than transactional. That evening, he sent a simple message: "Thank you for the coffee and conversation. It's rare to meet someone who understands the balance between ambition and obligation." The message was carefully crafted, personal enough to indicate genuine interest, professional enough to maintain appropriate boundaries. It marked the beginning of a relationship that would evolve gradually from customer service to friendship to something far more dangerous for both of them. Kareem began calling her every Thursday evening. He said he liked to end the week by speaking life into someone, a phrase that felt deliberate without sounding rehearsed. The calls came at 8:30 p.m. precisely, after her shift ended and before her roommates returned from their evening routines. The timing suggested consideration, as if he understood the delicate balance of privacy in a shared studio apartment. Their conversations lasted an hour, sometimes longer. They didn't talk about money or politics or the surface-level complaints that filled most expatriate discussions. Instead, they explored deeper territories: legacy, service, the weight of responsibility toward family members who depended on decisions made thousands of miles away. Kareem spoke about his work not as profit generation but as creating homes for families, providing security for people starting new lives in a foreign country. "I didn't choose construction for the money," he told her during their third Thursday call. "I chose it because every building represents someone's dream of stability. When I sign off on a project, I'm signing off on a family's future." The sentiment resonated with Mara, who understood the profound responsibility of other people's hopes. Every dirham she sent home carried the weight of her siblings' education, her parents' medical needs, her family's gradual climb toward security. When Kareem spoke about purpose and assignment, he was speaking her language. It was during their fifth Thursday conversation that he shared his most carefully crafted vulnerability. He told her about Layla, his fiancée who had died 3 years earlier in a car accident on Sheikh Zayed Road. They had been planning a wedding, he said, something small and meaningful rather than the elaborate celebrations that Dubai's wealthy expatriates typically demanded. "She was a teacher," Kareem said, his voice carrying the practiced weight of controlled grief. "Filipino, actually. She taught second grade at a British school in Jumeirah. She used to say that children were the only honest people in Dubai because they hadn't learned to hide behind money yet." The story felt authentic in its specificity. Details about her laugh, her habit of correcting his Arabic pronunciation, the way she insisted on cooking traditional Filipino dishes even though she burned rice more often than not. But the most powerful element was his conclusion: "I had to forgive God for taking her. It took me 2 years to understand that anger at him was really anger at myself for not protecting her." The line landed exactly where Kareem intended. Mara heard a man who understood loss, who had done the spiritual work to process grief, who spoke about faith with the complexity of someone who had wrestled with divine disappointment and emerged stronger. She thought she was witnessing authentic vulnerability. She didn't recognize performance art refined through repetition. From that conversation forward, Mara's emotional walls began to soften. She started looking forward to Thursday evenings with an anticipation that felt dangerous but inevitable. When Kareem asked about her faith, her family, her dreams beyond sending money home, she found herself sharing thoughts she rarely voiced even to herself. The loneliness of Dubai, its gleaming surfaces and social hierarchies, made authentic connection feel precious and rare. Kareem was patient. He never pushed for personal details or suggested meeting outside their established pattern. Instead, he created emotional intimacy through consistency and attention. He remembered her stories, asked follow-up questions about her family members by name, showed genuine interest in her perspectives on everything from technology trends to cultural adaptation. For the first time since arriving in Dubai, Mara felt seen as more than a service provider or remittance sender. 15 kilometers away in Marina Pinnacle, Parisa Al-Sayegh was experiencing a different kind of recognition. At 38, after 13 years of marriage and countless medical consultations, she stared at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test, while her husband conducted his Thursday evening phone call in the next room. The pregnancy should have been pure joy. She and Kareem had spent the first 5 years of their marriage actively trying to conceive, then another 5 in fertility clinics that promised results and delivered expensive disappointments. Somewhere around year 10, they had stopped discussing children altogether, accepting childlessness as the price of their pragmatic union. But the timing felt cursed. Just as new life was forming inside her, Parisa could sense her husband's attention focusing elsewhere. She recognized the signs from previous affairs: the careful grooming, the strategic absences, the phone calls taken in private with the door closed. The pregnancy, which should have been their miracle, was competing with another woman for her husband's emotional investment. Parisa knew about Melissa, the teenage supermarket cashier whose affair with Kareem had lasted 7 months 2 years earlier. She had discovered that relationship through credit card statements, hotel charges, restaurant bills, jewelry purchases that never appeared in her collection. When confronted, Kareem had offered his standard response: a temporary lapse in judgment, a moment of weakness, an affair that meant nothing and was now finished. But this felt different. The Thursday calls suggested emotional investment rather than physical convenience. The care he took to privacy indicated someone worth protecting. When Parisa noticed him returning from Dubai Marina Mall with the satisfied expression of someone who had accomplished more than a simple electronics purchase, she understood that her husband's pattern was evolving. The pregnancy complicated every possible response. Divorce would mean losing her visa status, her social position, and her financial security at the precise moment when she needed stability most. The expatriate community in Dubai was small enough that scandals followed people indefinitely, and being known as the pregnant woman who couldn't keep her husband would make her invisible at exactly the wrong time. But staying married to a man who collected vulnerable women while she carried his child felt like a different kind of death. Parisa had spent 13 years maintaining the facade of a successful marriage, attending social events alone, and explaining Kareem's absences with practiced grace. She had mastered the art of beautiful suffering, converting humiliation into dignified endurance. Now, with life growing inside her, that endurance felt like complicity. Every Thursday evening phone call, every unexplained absence, every careful lie about late meetings represented a choice to prioritize his comfort over their child's future stability. The pregnancy had given her something to protect beyond her own dignity. Affairs in Dubai survived through logistics, and Kareem understood the infrastructure of discretion. By December 2017, his relationship with Mara had evolved beyond Thursday phone calls to carefully orchestrated meetings that required the precision of military operations. He met her during her split shifts or on days when he could plausibly check construction sites in areas far from his usual business territories. The hotels were chosen strategically, mid-range properties in Dera and Al Bursha where business travelers came and went without memorable interactions. Places like City Seasons Hotel and Ramada downtown, where lobby staff recognized corporate credit cards more than faces. Kareem booked rooms under his company's travel management account, a system that allowed him to make reservations without personal credit card trails. He told his accountant that he occasionally needed rooms for out-of-town contractors or late-night meetings with international clients calling from different time zones. The bookings appeared on corporate statements as legitimate business expenses rather than personal indulgences. He paid for meals and incidental expenses in cash whenever possible, withdrawing money from ATMs in areas unconnected to his usual routines. When credit cards were necessary, he used a business account that Parisa never monitored, reasoning that construction-related expenses were too numerous and complicated for personal oversight. The second phone was a simple precaution, a prepaid device purchased with cash and registered under his company name. He kept it in his office rather than bringing it home, charging it overnight when Parisa was asleep. The phone existed solely for communication with Mara, creating a digital boundary between his family life and his affair. Transportation required similar planning. Kareem rarely drove his own car to meet Mara, instead borrowing vehicles from his company's fleet or using ride-hailing services paid for through corporate accounts. When he did drive his personal car, he varied his routes and parking locations, avoiding patterns that might be noticed by people who knew his usual habits. The meetings themselves followed careful protocols. Never the same location twice in a month. Never during times when Parisa expected him home for social obligations or family commitments. Always with plausible cover stories that aligned with his business schedule and could be verified through work-related activities. For Mara, these logistics felt like consideration rather than manipulation. Kareem's careful planning appeared to prioritize her comfort and safety, protecting her reputation in a city where Filipino women involved with married men faced social and professional consequences. When he suggested meeting at hotels rather than restaurants, she interpreted it as respect for her privacy rather than strategy for his concealment. But something shifted during their third meeting at Al Seif Hotel in January 2018. As they sat in the room after what Kareem described as just talking somewhere private, Mara realized she wanted to remember these moments more clearly. The conversations felt significant, transformative, worth preserving beyond the limitations of memory. She started recording without telling him. At first, the recordings were innocent, audio files of their conversations about dreams, family, the future they both imagined beyond their current circumstances. She told herself she wanted to remember the way Kareem spoke about purpose and connection, the way he made her feel understood in a city that often rendered her invisible. The recordings evolved as their relationship deepened. What began as audio documentation expanded to include photographs, pictures of gifts Kareem brought her, screenshots of their text conversations, images of hotel receipts and room keycards. She stored everything in a carefully organized folder system on Google Drive, hidden behind innocuous labels that looked like work documents. Mara rationalized the documentation as emotional insurance. The affair felt too important, too life-changing, to exist only in the uncertain territory of memory. She wanted proof that someone had seen her worth, had chosen her company over other options, had invested time and attention in her thoughts and dreams. But gradually, the documentation acquired a different psychological weight. As Kareem's promises about their future grew more specific, talks of leaving his marriage, of setting her up in a better apartment, of eventually bringing her family to Dubai, the recordings became evidence of commitments that felt too valuable to trust to verbal agreements alone. She never threatened Kareem with the recordings, never suggested they were anything other than personal mementos. But their existence changed the power dynamic of the relationship in ways she was only beginning to understand. The vulnerable woman who had accepted gifts and promises with grateful humility was slowly becoming someone with leverage, with proof, with the ability to document truth in a world built on careful lies. By February 2018, Mara had accumulated dozens of audio recordings, photographs, and text message screenshots. The collection told the story of an affair that had progressed from emotional connection to physical intimacy, from casual meetings to regular arrangements, from vague promises about the future to specific plans for a shared life. She didn't know it yet, but she was creating the very evidence that would eventually destroy her. Every recorded conversation, every documented promise, every photograph of gifts and hotel rooms was building a case that someone else would use against her. In trying to preserve proof of being loved, she was documenting the circumstances of her own undoing. The breaking point arrived on a humid Thursday morning in March 2018, when Parisa Al-Sayegh walked into their bedroom carrying a pregnancy test and found her husband preparing for another day of careful deception. Kareem was adjusting his tie in the mirror, the same precise movements he performed every morning before leaving for what he claimed were construction site inspections. The second phone sat charging on his nightstand, a detail Parisa had noticed weeks earlier but chosen not to confront. She had learned that direct confrontation with her husband yielded strategic apologies rather than genuine change. "I'm pregnant," she said, placing the test on his dresser next to his wallet and keys. Kareem stopped mid-adjustment, his hands frozen on the silk fabric. For exactly 3 seconds, his face displayed unguarded surprise. Not joy, not excitement, just the complex calculation of someone whose carefully managed life had introduced an unplanned variable. "That's," he began, then recalibrated his response to match what she expected to hear. "That's wonderful news. After all these years." He moved toward her with the rehearsed affection of someone performing husbandly enthusiasm. But Parisa stepped back before he could embrace her. "Is it wonderful?" she asked. "Because you haven't seemed particularly invested in this family lately." The accusation hung between them, loaded with 13 years of accumulated knowledge. Parisa knew about the affairs, not just Melissa, but the others before her, the pattern of emotional investment followed by strategic withdrawal. She had tolerated them because she understood her role in their arrangement. Maintain the appearance of a successful marriage while he managed his need for variety and conquest. But pregnancy changed the mathematics of tolerance. She was no longer protecting just her own dignity and social position. She was protecting their child's future stability, and that responsibility made her previous accommodations feel like collaboration with damage rather than management of it. Kareem left for work that morning with promises to discuss their future over dinner. Instead, he spent his lunch break composing a carefully worded text message to Mara. "We need to be sensible about our situation. Things are getting complicated at home." The message arrived while Mara was helping a customer configure a wireless router, and she read it during her afternoon break with the growing dread of someone who recognized the language of gentle abandonment. In 6 months of Thursday calls and hotel meetings, Kareem had never used the word sensible to describe their relationship. Sensible suggested practicality over passion, logistics over love. Her response came 2 hours later. Sensible for whom? Those 3 words carried the weight of every promise he had made about their future together. Every conversation about leaving his marriage when the timing was right. Every discussion about setting her up in a better apartment, helping her family, creating a life together that didn't require secrecy and careful scheduling. Kareem's reply was longer, crafted with the diplomatic language of someone ending a business partnership rather than a romantic relationship. "I need to focus on my family responsibilities right now. I want to help you transition financially until you're stable on your own. You deserve better than what I can offer in our current circumstances." The words felt like script because they were. Kareem had used similar language with Melissa, with the gallery manager before her, with every woman who had believed his promises carried weight beyond the moments they were spoken. Financial stabilization was his standard exit strategy. Enough money to ease his conscience and ensure silence, but not enough to suggest ongoing obligation. That evening, Mara renamed the Google Drive folder containing their recorded conversations, photographs, and text message screenshots. The label changed from Work Documents Backup to Kareem Proof. She didn't make the change as a threat or a warning. She made it because the folder's contents had transformed from mementos of love into evidence of lies, and she wanted the truth to have an honest name. The folder rename triggered a sync across all connected devices, a routine background process that Google Drive performed millions of times daily across millions of accounts. Under normal circumstances, the sync would have remained invisible, updating files silently across authorized devices without user notification. But Kareem's digital security had one crucial vulnerability that he had forgotten about completely. 3 weeks earlier, he had used Mara's phone to download a boarding pass for a business trip to Abu Dhabi. His email was temporarily logged into her device, and in his haste to print the document through the hotel's business center, he had failed to properly log out. The account connection remained active in the background, invisible to both of them until Mara's folder rename triggered a notification that new content had been added to his Google Drive. The same videos, photographs, and text conversations that she had documented as proof of their relationship were now syncing to his account, creating a digital trail that connected directly to his family's shared devices. Kareem discovered the breach the next morning when he opened his laptop and found a folder he didn't recognize in his Drive directory. The contents were immediately identifiable: audio recordings of their conversations, photographs of hotel receipts, screenshots of their text exchanges spanning 6 months of increasingly intimate communication. The panic was physical, heart rate spiking, hands trembling as he scrolled through documentation that could destroy his marriage, his business relationships, his carefully constructed reputation. He immediately began deleting files, clearing browser history, removing any trace of Mara's access to his accounts. But he was too late. Parisa had already seen the folder. She discovered it by accident, using the family iMac in their home office to check email while Kareem was in the shower. The Google Drive icon in the dock showed a sync notification, and she clicked it absently, expecting to find construction documents or business presentations. Instead, she found a thumbnail image that made her stomach contract with recognition and rage. The photo showed a hotel room keycard next to a receipt from Al Seif Hotel, dated just 2 weeks earlier. Next to it was an audio file labeled Thursday Call March 8th, and a text conversation screenshot where Kareem promised someone named Mara that he would take care of everything. Parisa clicked on the audio file and listened to her husband's voice speaking with an intimacy she hadn't heard directed toward her in years. He was discussing plans for the future, talking about leaving his marriage when the circumstances were right, promising financial support and emotional commitment to someone who was clearly more than a business associate. The betrayal was comprehensive. Not just physical infidelity, but emotional investment. Not just a temporary lapse in judgment, but months of planning and promise-making. Not just sex, but the construction of an alternate life that excluded their marriage, their history, and now their unborn child. For exactly 10 minutes, Parisa sat in their home office listening to her husband plan to abandon their family while she carried his child. Then she closed the laptop, walked to their bedroom, and began planning her response. The anger was nuclear, but she channeled it into something more dangerous: absolute clarity. For 2 days, Parisa researched with the methodical precision of someone whose life depended on making the right strategic choices. She consulted divorce lawyers discreetly, learning about asset protection, custody arrangements, and the social implications of public scandal in Dubai's expatriate community. She spoke to 3 different attorneys, each consultation paid for in cash to avoid credit card trails. She learned that divorce proceedings involving UAE residents could become public record, that custody battles often favored the party with greater financial resources, and that her pregnancy could work either for or against her depending on how the situation was managed. More importantly, she learned about reputation management in a city where social standing directly impacted business success. Kareem's construction company depended on relationships with investors, government officials, and other businessmen who valued discretion and family stability. A public scandal involving infidelity, especially with a much younger Filipino woman, could damage his professional credibility and reduce his ability to provide financial support. But Parisa also understood that her own social position was fragile. The expatriate community in Dubai was small enough that scandals followed people indefinitely. Being known as the pregnant wife who couldn't control her husband would make her invisible in social circles where visibility was essential for security. The solution required private resolution rather than public exposure. Direct confrontation that established clear boundaries without creating gossip or legal complications. A conversation that ended the affair definitively while protecting both her marriage and her child's future. On Saturday evening, while Kareem was at a business dinner that she now suspected was another carefully constructed lie, Parisa used the phone number from his text message screenshots to call Mara directly. The conversation would last exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. It would be polite, direct, and focused on practical resolution rather than emotional confrontation. It would propose a meeting to discuss the situation professionally and offer financial compensation for understanding and cooperation. Most importantly, it would be the first step in a plan that Parisa had developed to protect her family by eliminating the threat to its stability. A plan that required Mara to trust her, to meet her, to believe that the pregnant wife calling about her husband's affair was interested in negotiation rather than revenge. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening while Mara was folding laundry in the studio apartment she shared with Gina and Rachel. The unknown number displayed a Dubai area code, and she answered with the professional courtesy that had become automatic after months of customer service work. "Hello, is this Mara Dizon?" The voice was educated, controlled, speaking English with the careful precision of someone for whom it was a learned language rather than a native tongue. "Yes, this is Mara. How can I help you?" "My name is Kareem Al-Sayegh. I believe you know my husband, Kareem." The words hit Mara's stomach like cold water. She had known this moment was possible. The discovery, the confrontation, the end of secrets that had felt sustainable only because they remained hidden. But hearing the wife's voice, calm and matter-of-fact, made the affair feel suddenly real and devastatingly wrong. I'm not sure what you mean," Mara began, the automatic denial of someone caught in circumstances she couldn't immediately escape. "I think you do," Parisa replied, her tone remaining steady. "I'm not calling to scream at you or threaten you. I'm calling because we need to have a conversation about how to handle this situation professionally." The word professionally carried weight. It suggested business rather than emotion, negotiation rather than confrontation. For Mara, who had spent 6 months navigating the complex feelings of loving someone else's husband, the offer of practical resolution felt like unexpected mercy. "I don't want any trouble," Mara said quietly. "Neither do I," Parisa responded. "That's why I think we should meet face to face. I have a proposition that might work for both of us. Something that provides closure without creating problems for anyone involved." Parisa's voice carried the exhausted authority of someone who had spent 2 days researching legal options and social consequences. Someone who understood that private resolution was preferable to public scandal. She didn't sound angry, which somehow made the conversation more unsettling than screaming would have been. "What kind of proposition?" Mara asked. "Financial compensation," Parisa said directly. "Not hush money. I'm not asking you to hide anything that's already happened. But I am asking for your cooperation in ending this situation cleanly. No drama, no legal complications, no social media posts or revenge attempts. Just a clean ending that lets everyone move forward." The offer was sophisticated in its simplicity. Parisa understood that Mara's participation in the affair had been motivated partly by financial desperation, that the promise of security had been as seductive as the promise of love. Money could solve the practical problems that had made the affair attractive in the first place. "How much are we talking about?" Mara asked, hating herself for the question but needing to understand the scope of what was being offered. "Enough to make a real difference in your life," Parisa replied. "But we should discuss the details in person. The lobby of Al Noor Hotel in Dera, tomorrow at 6 p.m. My driver will collect you from the Marina Mall if transportation is an issue." The location choice was strategic. Al Noor Hotel was respectable but not luxurious, the kind of place where business meetings happened without attracting attention. Dera was far enough from both women's usual routines to provide privacy while remaining accessible by public transportation. "I need to think about this," Mara said. "Of course," Parisa responded. "But understand that my patience has limits. If you prefer to handle this through lawyers and police reports, that's your choice. But I'm offering you a chance to resolve this quietly and walk away with something substantial. Most women in your situation don't get that opportunity." The implied threat was polite but clear. Parisa had legal options and social connections that could make Mara's life in Dubai very difficult. The expatriate community was small enough that scandal could follow someone indefinitely, affecting employment opportunities and visa renewals. The offer of private resolution was generous compared to the alternatives. After hanging up, Mara sat on her narrow bed staring at her phone for 20 minutes. The conversation had changed everything. The affair was no longer a secret romance with an uncertain future. but a situation requiring immediate resolution. Kareem's promises about leaving his wife, about building a life together, had evaporated the moment his pregnant wife offered money for Mara's disappearance. She texted her friend Jennifer in Sharjah, "Meeting Kareem's wife tomorrow evening. Al Noor Hotel, Dara, 6 p.m. If something happens to me, this is where I was." The message wasn't dramatic, just practical insurance from someone who had learned to leave breadcrumbs when navigating unfamiliar territory. The next day, Mara left work early and changed into her most professional outfit. A navy blue dress with sleeves that covered her shoulders, modest black shoes, minimal jewelry. She wanted to look respectful, serious, someone worthy of negotiation rather than dismissal. The choice felt important, as if the right clothes could somehow legitimize her position in a situation where she had very little power. Al Noor Hotel occupied a corner building in Old Dara, the kind of establishment that had been respectable for decades without ever being fashionable. The lobby smelled like lemon polish and old conferences, filled with the quiet efficiency of business travelers who prioritized function over style. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted cream, and leather furniture arranged in conversation clusters suggested serious discussions rather than social gatherings. Parisa was already waiting when Mara arrived at 5:51 p.m., seated in a chair position strategically near a marble column that provided partial privacy from the main lobby traffic. She was smaller than Mara had expected, elegant in the way that money and education create, wearing a cream-colored abaya that disguised any sign of early pregnancy. The manila envelope on the table between them was thick enough to suggest substantial contents, and the hotel room keycard beside it indicated that this conversation was planned to continue beyond the public lobby. Parisa's positioning suggested someone who understood surveillance and privacy, someone who had chosen this location and seating arrangement with careful consideration of sightlines and escape routes. "Thank you for coming," Parisa said as Mara approached, her voice carrying the same controlled courtesy from their phone conversation. "I know this is uncomfortable for both of us. I still don't really understand what you want," Mara replied, taking the chair across from her. "I want my marriage to survive my husband's poor judgment," Parisa said directly. "I want my child to grow up in a stable home. And I want this situation resolved before it becomes public knowledge that damages all of us." The reference to a child hit Mara like physical impact. Kareem had never mentioned that his wife was pregnant, never suggested that their affair was competing with an unborn baby for his attention and commitment. The pregnancy explained the urgency, the offer of money, the controlled desperation in Parisa's voice. "He never told me," Mara said quietly. "I'm sure there are many things he never told you," Parisa replied. "That's why we need to discuss this privately. The lobby isn't really the appropriate place for this conversation." She gestured toward the keycard. "I've taken a room upstairs where we can speak freely." Mara hesitated. Meeting in a hotel room felt more intimate and potentially dangerous than negotiating in a public lobby. But Parisa's demeanor suggested business rather than violence, and the offer of financial resolution was too significant to dismiss without proper consideration. "Just to talk," Mara said. "Just to talk," Parisa confirmed. "To reach an understanding that works for everyone involved." They walked to the elevator together, two women whose lives had become entangled through one man's capacity for compartmentalization and deception. The elevator was small and mirrored, forcing them to see themselves together, the wife and the mistress, the pregnant woman and the younger woman, the person with power and the person with very little. The key card worked on the first try, opening the door to room 412 at 5:58 p.m. Parisa entered first, moving with the confidence of someone who had prepared for this meeting thoroughly. Mara followed, checking that the door remained unlocked behind them, a basic safety precaution she had learned from other Filipino women who navigated Dubai's complex social hierarchies. At 6:01 p.m., Parisa used the key card again, this time to double-lock the door from the inside. The sound was subtle but definitive, transforming the room from a meeting space into something more contained and private. Mara's phone disconnected from the hotel's lobby Wi-Fi and failed to connect to the room's network, leaving her temporarily isolated from outside communication. The data saver setting she used to manage her limited monthly allowance prevented automatic background updates, creating a brief digital silence that would later become significant to investigators. But Mara had developed habits of documentation during her months with Kareem, and she activated the voice recording app on her phone as they settled into chairs near the window. The app would run continuously in the background, capturing whatever conversation was about to unfold between a pregnant wife and the woman who had believed her husband's promises about leaving his marriage. Parisa sat across from her, hands folded over her still flat stomach in a gesture that was partly protective and partly performative. She was carrying new life while confronting the woman who threatened that life's stability, trying to resolve a situation that required her to be simultaneously vulnerable and strong, desperate and controlled. "Let's finish this conversation properly," Parisa said, opening the manila envelope and removing its contents with the deliberate movements of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "So we can both move forward with our lives." Neither woman knew that these would be among the last normal words spoken in the room. Within an hour, one of them would be dead, and the other would be making phone calls that would determine whether the truth about this meeting ever emerged or remained buried beneath layers of reputation management and careful lies. The recording app continued running silently in Mara's tote bag, documenting the final moments before everything changed forever. The manila envelope contained exactly what Parisa had promised: AD 20,000 in crisp bills and a 2-page legal document that looked professionally prepared. She spread both items on the small table between them with the precision of someone conducting a business transaction. "This covers everything," Parisa said, gesturing toward the money. "Your time with my husband, your silence about what happened, and your cooperation in ensuring this situation ends cleanly." Mara picked up the cash, feeling its weight. 20,000 dirhams represented nearly 6 months of her current salary, enough to send substantial money home while maintaining her own living expenses. It was more money than she had ever held at one time, offered by a woman whose pregnancy made the affair feel suddenly, devastatingly real. "This covers your feelings," Mara replied, setting the money back down. "Mine are not covered." The response surprised Parisa, who had expected gratitude or at least practical acceptance. She had researched Mara's background thoroughly: the family financial struggles, the monthly remittances, the visa status that could be jeopardized by scandal. The money should have been enough to ensure cooperation. "I'm not sure I understand," Parisa said, her voice maintaining its controlled courtesy despite the pregnancy hormones that made every emotion feel amplified and urgent. "This is substantially more than most people in your situation could expect." "My situation?" Mara's tone sharpened. "You mean being lied to for 6 months by your husband? Being promised a future that he never intended to provide? Being treated like a problem to be managed rather than a person with feelings?" Parisa's composure flickered briefly. The pregnancy had made her emotional responses more volatile, and the combination of betrayal, fear, and protective instinct toward her unborn child created a dangerous psychological cocktail. "You knew he was married," she said. "You chose to get involved with someone else's husband." "He told me you had an arrangement," Mara replied. "He said you lived separate lives, that you wouldn't interfere with his choices. He made it sound like I wasn't destroying anything." "He told you what you wanted to hear," Parisa said, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. "Just like he told me what I wanted to hear when we got married. Just like he told the Filipino girl before you what she wanted to hear." The reference to Melissa hit Mara with recognition and humiliation. She hadn't been special, hadn't been chosen for her unique qualities or irreplaceable connection with Kareem. She had been the latest iteration of a pattern, selected for her vulnerability and discarded when convenience shifted to complication. "Sign the agreement," Parisa continued, sliding the legal document across the table. "Take the money. Move on with your life. Find someone who isn't already building a family with someone else." Mara read the document quickly, recognizing standard non-disclosure language despite her lack of legal training. The agreement prohibited her from contacting Kareem, discussing their relationship publicly, or making any claims about promises he had made regarding their future together. "I'm not asking for your marriage," Mara said. "I'm not asking to wreck your family. I'm asking to stop being treated like a transaction that can be cancelled with the right payment. Then what do you want? Parisa asked, the question carrying genuine confusion rather than negotiation strategy. I want him to tell me the truth about what this was, Mara said. I want to hear from him that everything he promised was a lie. I want to stop wondering if there was something real that I'm giving up for money. You're giving up nothing real, Parisa replied sharply. You're giving up an affair with a married man whose wife is pregnant. You're giving up promises that were never going to be kept. You're giving up being the other woman. The words landed with brutal clarity, stripping away the romantic narrative that had sustained Mara through months of secret meetings and careful lies. She wasn't giving up love. She was giving up the illusion of love, the fantasy that someone like Kareem would actually abandon his established life for someone like her. Take your money, Mara said, standing abruptly. Keep your husband. Raise your baby. I'll find my own way out of this mess. She moved toward the door, but Parisa's voice stopped her. If you walk away without signing that agreement, I'll make sure everyone knows what you did. Your employer, your roommates, the Filipino community in Dubai. Everyone will know you're the kind of woman who goes after married men. The threat was delivered calmly, but it carried the weight of social destruction. Dubai's Filipino community was tight-knit, and reputation mattered for everything from employment opportunities to housing arrangements. Being labeled as someone who targeted married men would follow Mara indefinitely. Do whatever you want, Mara replied, reaching for the door handle. I'm done letting people use me and then blame me for being used. She left the room at 6:24 p.m., moving quickly down the fourth-floor corridor toward the stairwell. The elevator felt too confined, too much like the room she had just escaped. The stairs provided movement, escape, the physical action that matched her emotional need to get away from a situation that had made her feel smaller with every passing minute. Parisa followed, her pregnant body moving more slowly but with grim determination. She couldn't let Mara leave without some form of resolution, couldn't allow the affair to end with loose threads that might unravel into public scandal. The pregnancy made everything feel more urgent, more final. This was her one opportunity to protect her family's future. By 6:27 p.m., both women had reached the parking structure, their footsteps echoing in the concrete space. Mara moved quickly toward the exit, her phone still recording in her tote bag, capturing the sound of pursuit and the elevated breathing of two women under extreme stress. Parisa followed at a distance, her head down and scarf pulled up to partially obscure her face from security cameras. The parking structure was poorly lit, with blind spots created by support columns and the angular shadows of parked vehicles. It was the kind of space where confrontations could occur without immediate witnesses. Mara, wait, Parisa called, her voice carrying the desperation she had been controlling throughout their meeting. We need to finish this conversation. But Mara didn't stop. She had heard enough, absorbed enough humiliation, accepted enough blame for a situation that had been constructed through someone else's lies. The pregnancy, the money, the legal agreement. All of it was designed to make her disappear quietly, to let Kareem continue his pattern without consequences while she bore the responsibility for trusting his promises. A construction worker in a van on level 2 later told police he heard a sharp argument echoing up through the concrete structure. Voices in English, then Arabic, then what sounded like Tagalog. The conversation was heated but brief, lasting no more than 2 minutes before the sound shifted from words to movement, from verbal confrontation to physical proximity. At 6:36 p.m., near a level change barrier that separated the fourth floor from a 3-meter drop to the parking structure's ground level, the argument reached its final moments. Parisa's desperation had overcome her careful planning, her pregnant body's limitations pushing her into emotional territory she hadn't anticipated. You're going to destroy my family? She said, reaching for Mara's arm as they approached the concrete barrier. My child deserves better than having a father who abandoned his family for someone he barely knows. Your child deserves better than having a father who lies to everyone, Mara replied, pulling away from Parisa's grip. Including you. The barrier was low, designed more for marking the level change than preventing falls. Safety regulations that might have required higher barriers or protective screening had been minimal when the structure was built years earlier. The 3-meter drop to the ground level was significant but not immediately obvious in the poor lighting. What happened in the next 30 seconds would be reconstructed from physical evidence, witness statements, and the audio recording that continued running in Mara's bag. The conversation became physical, not violently, but with the kind of desperate contact that occurs when people are trying to prevent something they fear more than they're trying to cause harm. Parisa grabbed Mara's arm again, this time to stop her from leaving before they had reached some form of agreement. Her pregnancy made her movements awkward, her balance uncertain. Mara tried to pull away, moving backward toward the barrier without realizing how close she was to the edge. The fall happened quickly. One moment they were both standing near the barrier, the next Mara was toppling over the low concrete edge, her phone still recording as it fell with her to the ground level 3 meters below. The impact was immediate and devastating. Mara's body hit the concrete with a sound that the construction worker described as like a bag of tools dropping from a truck. Her phone cracked but continued recording, capturing the silence that followed and Parisa's sharp intake of breath from above. At 6:41 p.m., a security guard making his evening rounds discovered Mara's body at the bottom of the level change, her phone face down beside her, still recording the empty concrete and the sound of distant traffic. The fall had been fatal, but the circumstances would take weeks to untangle from the careful lies that all 3 participants had constructed around their secret arrangement. Above, Parisa stood at the barrier looking down at the consequences of her husband's promises and her own desperation to protect a family that may not have deserved protection. In 37 minutes, she would call Kareem and tell him to come immediately. In 4 hours, she would give her first statement to police. But for those few minutes, she stood alone with the knowledge that her attempt to save her marriage had ended with someone else's death. Dubai Police Criminal Investigation Department handled domestic scandals with the clinical precision of surgeons operating on reputations as much as crimes. When Detective Inspector Khalid Al-Mansouri arrived at Al Noor Hotel's parking structure at 7:23 p.m., he brought 15 years of experience managing cases where expatriate families, business relationships, and social standing intersected in explosive combinations. The scene was immediately cordoned off, photographers documenting everything from multiple angles before anyone could disturb the physical evidence. Mara's body lay face down near a concrete support column, her phone cracked but intact beside her right hand. The distance from the barrier to the impact point suggested a vertical fall rather than a jump, but the circumstances surrounding that fall would require careful reconstruction. Detective Al-Mansouri noted the barrier height first, barely 1 meter, inadequate by current safety standards but compliant with regulations when the structure had been built 8 years earlier. The concrete edge showed fresh scuff marks where something had scraped against it with force. More significantly, there were fabric fibers embedded in the rough concrete surface, cream-colored threads that looked inconsistent with Mara's navy dress. The impact pattern told its own story. Mara had landed heavily on her left side, with injuries consistent with an uncontrolled fall rather than a deliberate jump. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment noted defensive bruising on her forearms and what appeared to be grip marks on her left wrist, suggesting physical contact moments before the fall. But the case acquired immediate political complexity when Parisa Al-Sayegh arrived at the scene 47 minutes after the body's discovery. Her pregnancy was visible now in her distress, hands cradling her stomach as she spoke to officers with the controlled hysteria of someone trying to manage crisis while protecting unborn life. The optics were devastating. Pregnant wife as potential suspect in her husband's mistress's death. Dubai's expatriate community was small enough that scandals involving prominent families became public relations challenges for the Emirates' carefully maintained image of safety and stability. A pregnant Emirati woman being investigated for murdering her husband's Filipino mistress could generate the kind of international attention that tourism boards spent millions to avoid. The initial interviews were conducted with diplomatic sensitivity. Parisa's statement was taken in a private hospital room, with medical staff monitoring her stress levels and blood pressure. She described discovering her husband's affair through accidentally found evidence, calling Mara to discuss resolution, and meeting at the hotel to offer financial compensation for discretion. "I wanted to handle this privately," Parisa told Detective Al-Mansouri, her voice steady despite obvious exhaustion. For my family's reputation and for my baby's future. I offered her money to disappear quietly. When she refused and became hostile, I tried to reason with her. The next thing I knew, she had fallen. The account was plausible but incomplete. Parisa claimed that Mara had become agitated and aggressive during their conversation, leading to a confrontation near the parking structure barrier. She admitted to following Mara from the hotel room, but denied any physical contact beyond trying to calm her down. Digital forensics provided a more complex picture. Mara's phone contained the audio recording that had run continuously from their hotel room meeting through the parking structure confrontation. The sound quality was poor due to the phone's position in her bag, but enhanced analysis revealed crucial details about the final minutes. The conversation in the hotel room showed Parisa offering money and legal agreements while Mara demanded respect and honesty about Kareem's promises. The tone escalated gradually, with Parisa becoming more insistent about signing the non-disclosure agreement and Mara becoming more resistant to being managed out of the situation. More damaging was the parking structure audio, which captured Parisa pursuing Mara despite claims that she had only followed to continue their discussion. The recording included Parisa's desperate plea. "You're going to destroy my family. My child deserves better than having a father who abandoned his family for someone he barely knows." The response from Mara was equally clear. "Your child deserves better than having a father who lies to everyone, including you." Hotel security footage corroborated the timeline and movements, showing both women leaving room 412 at different times. Mara moving quickly toward the stairwell, while Parisa followed at a slower pace. The parking structure cameras captured partial views of their final confrontation, including the moment when Parisa reached toward Mara near the barrier. But the investigation's scope expanded dramatically when detectives obtained warrants for Kareem's digital accounts and discovered the Google Drive folder containing evidence of his affair with Mara. The folder revealed not just their relationship but a pattern of similar relationships with other vulnerable women, including detailed documentation of his affair with Melissa Santos, the 19-year-old supermarket cashier. Detective Al-Mansouri contacted Melissa through employment records and discovered a story that mirrored Mara's experience almost exactly. Kareem had approached her gradually, offered financial assistance for her family's needs, made promises about leaving his wife, then ended the relationship abruptly when it became inconvenient. The pattern suggested predatory behavior rather than emotional involvement. "He told me Parisa was cold, that they lived like roommates," Melissa told investigators. "He said when his business deals were settled, he would file for divorce and we could be together properly. I believed him for 7 months before I realized he was never going to leave her." Melissa's testimony established Kareem's methodology, targeting young Filipino women in financially vulnerable positions, creating emotional dependency through promises of security and marriage, then discarding them when complications arose. The pattern made Mara's death appear less like a crime of passion and more like the inevitable conclusion of a system designed to exploit and dispose of inconvenient relationships. Kareem's interrogation revealed the contradictions that often trap people lying about multiple relationships simultaneously. He initially denied knowledge of Parisa's meeting with Mara, claiming to have been in business meetings all evening. But his phone records showed multiple calls with Parisa throughout the day, including a lengthy conversation 30 minutes before Mara's death. The most damaging evidence was the text message exchange between Kareem and Parisa that evening. At 6:05 p.m., 5 minutes after Parisa had locked herself and Mara in the hotel room, she had sent Kareem a message, "I'm handling it." His response came immediately, "Be careful. Don't do anything stupid." At 6:44 p.m., 3 minutes after Mara's body was discovered, Parisa sent another message, "Come now. Emergency." Kareem's location data showed him leaving his office immediately and driving directly to Al Noor Hotel, arriving before police had finished securing the scene. The phone records contradicted Kareem's claim of ignorance about the meeting. Call logs showed he had been in contact with Parisa throughout the day, including a conversation at 5:41 p.m. when she updated him on her plans to meet Mara and resolve the situation permanently. Detective Al-Mansouri confronted Kareem with the evidence during his second interview, held at Dubai Police Headquarters rather than the courtesy location of his office. The businessman's composed facade cracked when presented with his own messages and the audio recording of his wife confronting his mistress. "I told her not to meet with Mara," Kareem insisted. "I said we should handle it through lawyers, properly and legally." Parisa was emotional about the pregnancy and the affair. She wasn't thinking clearly. But the investigation revealed that Kareem had been instrumental in planning the confrontation. Bank records showed he had withdrawn AD 20,000 in cash 2 days before the meeting, money that Parisa had carried to the hotel. More significantly, the non-disclosure agreement found in Parisa's envelope had been drafted by Kareem's business attorney, suggesting premeditation rather than emotional reaction. The evidence painted a picture of coordinated action rather than spontaneous violence. Kareem had provided the money and legal documents, Parisa had conducted the negotiation, and both had underestimated Mara's refusal to be managed out of their lives quietly. Physical evidence from the scene supported the theory that Parisa had grabbed Mara during their final confrontation. The fabric fibers on the concrete barrier matched Parisa's cream abaya exactly, and forensic analysis of the grip marks on Mara's wrist revealed skin cells and DNA that belonged to Parisa. The medical examiner's final report concluded that Mara had died from head trauma consistent with an uncontrolled fall from height, but that the fall had been preceded by physical contact with another person. The bruising pattern suggested that someone had grabbed her arm moments before she went over the barrier, either to restrain her or in an attempt to prevent her from leaving. On March 28, 2018, exactly 2 weeks after Mara's death, Dubai police arrested both Kareem and Kareem Al-Sayegh on charges related to her killing. Kareem was charged with conspiracy and accessory after the fact. Parisa was charged with involuntary manslaughter and causing death by negligence. The arrests were conducted quietly, with both suspects taken into custody at their residence rather than in public locations that might generate media attention. Parisa's pregnancy was considered a complicating factor that required special handling, both legally and practically. The case that had begun with a laptop return and Thursday evening phone calls had evolved into a complex investigation involving digital forensics, international victims, and the kind of systemic exploitation that Dubai's authorities preferred to handle discreetly. 3 lives had been destroyed by a pattern of promises designed to be broken, and the investigation had revealed how easily vulnerable people could become disposable when their trust became inconvenient. The trial began on September 15, 2018, exactly 1 year after Mara Dizon had arrived in Dubai carrying dreams of supporting her family through honest work. By then, Kareem Al-Sayegh was 7 months pregnant, her condition impossible to ignore as she sat in the defendant's chair, wearing loose clothing that couldn't disguise the life growing inside her. The pregnancy created an unprecedented situation in Dubai's legal system. Court proceedings had to accommodate frequent breaks for medical needs, and the optics of a heavily pregnant woman on trial for killing her husband's mistress generated international media attention that Dubai's authorities had hoped to avoid. The case became a symbol of the complex power dynamics within the Emirates' expatriate community. Prosecutor Amina Hassan faced a strategic decision that would define the entire trial. The evidence supported charges ranging from premeditated murder to involuntary manslaughter, but the pregnancy and Parisa's social standing made the highest charges politically complicated. After weeks of deliberation, Hassan chose to pursue assault leading to death and obstruction of justice, charges that acknowledged intent while recognizing the absence of planning to kill. The prosecution's case centered on the pattern of exploitation that Kareem had established with vulnerable Filipino women. Melissa Santos testified via video link from the Philippines, describing how Kareem had used identical tactics to manipulate her into a relationship before discarding her when complications arose. Her testimony established that Mara wasn't an isolated incident but the latest victim in a systematic pattern of predatory behavior. "He made me believe I was special," Melissa told the court, her voice steady despite obvious discomfort. "He said his wife didn't understand him, that he was waiting for the right time to leave her for me. When I started asking about meeting his family, he suddenly had business problems that required his full attention." The prosecution argued that Parisa and Kareem had acted as conspirators to eliminate a problem that threatened their social position and financial stability. The evidence included the coordinated timing of their communications, the pre-drafted legal documents, and the substantial cash payment that suggested premeditation rather than emotional reaction. Defense attorney Sarah Mitchell faced the challenging task of defending a pregnant woman whose husband's infidelities had driven her to desperate action. Mitchell argued that Parisa had acted to protect her unborn child and marriage from a woman who was threatening to expose the affair publicly and destroy their family's reputation. This was not murder, Mitchell told the jury during opening statements. This was a desperate mother trying to protect her child's future from someone who was extorting her family. Mara Dizon's death was a tragic accident that occurred during a legitimate attempt to resolve a family crisis privately. The trial lasted 3 weeks with testimony from digital forensics experts, hotel staff, medical examiners, and the construction worker who had witnessed the final argument. The audio recording from Mara's phone was played multiple times, each replay making the desperation in both women's voices more apparent. The most devastating testimony came from Mara's family, who had traveled from the Philippines to attend the proceedings. Her mother, Elena, described receiving the call about her daughter's death while preparing dinner with money Mara had sent the previous week. "She worked so hard to help us," Elena said through tears. "She never asked for anything for herself. She just wanted to make our lives better and maybe find some happiness in Dubai." On October 8, 2018, after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on both major charges. Parisa was convicted of assault leading to death and obstruction of justice. Kareem was convicted of conspiracy and accessory after the fact. Judge Muhammad Al-Qasimi delivered the sentences with particular attention to the pattern of exploitation that had created the circumstances leading to Mara's death. Parisa received 7 years in prison, with consideration given to her pregnancy and first-time offender status. Kareem received a suspended 5-year sentence and a fine of AED 500,000, along with permanent deportation upon completion of his probation. This court recognizes that the defendant was acting under extreme emotional distress caused by her husband's systematic betrayal, Judge Al-Qasimi stated. However, the victim in this case was also a victim of that same system of manipulation and deceit. Ms. Dizon's death represents the tragic consequence of treating vulnerable people as disposable. The judge's commentary extended beyond the specific case to address broader issues of exploitation within Dubai's expatriate community. He noted that the pattern of behavior demonstrated by Kareem represented a form of systematic abuse that the legal system needed to address more effectively. Melissa Santos' family submitted a written statement to the court describing the ongoing impact of Kareem's manipulation on their daughter's mental health and future prospects. The statement revealed that Melissa had attempted suicide twice after the affair ended, believing herself responsible for being deceived by someone she trusted. Parisa gave birth to a son, Omar, on November 23, 2018, while serving her sentence at Dubai Women's Prison. The birth was attended by medical staff and family members, but the child's first months were spent in prison visiting rooms and temporary custody arrangements with Parisa's relatives. The case had immediate ripple effects throughout Dubai's Filipino community. OFW advocacy groups reported increased requests for guidance about recognizing manipulation tactics and protecting themselves from exploitation by employers and customers. The mall where Mara had worked implemented new policies about staff interactions with customers, though critics noted these measures focused on restricting workers rather than protecting them. Electronic Zone, the store where Mara had been employed, issued a brief statement expressing condolences to her family and emphasizing their commitment to employee welfare. The response was widely criticized as inadequate by labor advocates who pointed out that the company had failed to provide any meaningful support to Mara's family or implement systemic changes to protect other vulnerable workers. Kareem's construction business collapsed within 6 months of the trial's conclusion. The combination of legal fees, reputational damage, and the heavy fine made it impossible to maintain relationships with investors and government contractors who valued stability and discretion above all else. By mid-2019, he had liquidated most assets and left Dubai permanently. Mara's personal effects were returned to her family in a single cardboard box: work uniforms, a few books, photographs from home, and the phone that had recorded her final moments. Her mother kept the phone charged for months afterward, as if maintaining the connection might somehow preserve her daughter's presence. The broader impact on Dubai's OFW community was profound and lasting. The case became a cautionary tale shared in dormitories and break rooms, a reminder that the power imbalances that defined expatriate life could become deadly when combined with desperation and deceit. Young Filipino women working in retail and service industries reported increased wariness about customer relationships that extended beyond professional boundaries. Omar Al-Sayegh turned 2 years old while his mother remained in prison, visiting her weekly in the company of relatives who struggled to explain why mommy couldn't come home. The child's existence represents the most complex legacy of the case. New life born from circumstances that destroyed others, carrying the genetic inheritance of both victim and perpetrator. When Parisa is released in 2025, she will return to a Dubai that has largely forgotten the specifics of her case, but absorbed its lessons about the cost of reputation management and the vulnerability of people whose dreams make them targets for exploitation. Her son will grow up knowing that his birth was connected to another woman's death, a truth that will shape his understanding of justice, consequence, and the weight of choices made by people who believe themselves entitled to others' silence. The case revealed how ordinary steps, a customer service interaction, Thursday evening phone calls, a pregnancy announcement, a hotel meeting, could align into tragedy when power, desperation, and silence shared the same space. Most of all, it demonstrated how easily people become disposable when their humanity conflicts with others' convenience, and how the cost of that disposal extends far beyond the immediate victims to families, communities, and children who inherit the consequences of choices they never made.